The bank doors closed behind Marcus Reynolds with a finality that echoed his shattered dreams. Another rejection, the fourth one this month. No one seemed willing to take a chance on a former Marine with nothing but combat experience and a vision. What the loan officers didn't see when they stamped "denied" on his application was that this rejection would set in motion a chain of events that would not only transform Marcus's life, but reshape an entire community's future. The late autumn. Wind whipped through the streets of Cedar Grove, a once thriving railroad town in western Pennsylvania that had seen better days. Marcus pulled his worn leather jacket tighter around his shoulders, his combat boots striking the cracked sidewalk, with a rhythm that matched his racing thoughts. At 34, he felt decades older than his years, the weight of his 3 tours in Iraq etched into the lines around his eyes and the slight limp in his step, a souvenir from an IED that had cut his last deployment short. Main Street was a shadow of what he remembered from his childhood. The bustling shops and friendly faces had been replaced by empty storefronts and "for lease" signs that seemed to multiply like weeds after a spring rain. Finnegan's Hardware, where he'd bought his first toolkit at 12, was now a vape shop, with neon signs. O'Malley's Diner, famous for its apple cobbler and bottomless coffee, stood abandoned, its windows covered with weathered plywood. Marcus paused in front of Coleman's auto shop, or what used to be Coleman's. The old man had passed away while Marcus was deployed, and the building had been sitting empty ever since. Through the grimy windows, he could still make out the ghostly shapes of tool cabinets and hydraulic lifts. This was the place he'd dreamed about during those long nights in the desert, when the sound of distant explosions made sleep impossible. He'd spent countless hours here as a teenager, learning the intricate dance of pistons and timing belts under Old Man Coleman's watchful eye. The rejection letter crinkled in his pocket as he fished out his phone, thumb hovering over his sister. Rachel's number. She'd offered him a room in Pittsburgh, a chance to get back on his feet, as she'd put it, but the thought of living in the city, surrounded by crowds and chaos, made his chest tighten. Cedar Grove might be dying, but at least here he could breathe. As he walked past Veterans Memorial Park, a familiar voice cut through his thoughts. "Reynolds, Marcus Reynolds, is that you?" Marcus turned to see David Martinez, his former squad mate, sitting on one of the worn wooden benches near the central monument. David's face had filled out since their last deployment together, but his eyes still held that same intensity that had made him one of the best mechanics in their unit. "Martinez." Marcus managed a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Didn't know you were back in town. Been here about 6 months, David replied, gesturing for Marcus to join him. "Working part-time at the Quick Lube on Route 19. Not exactly what I dreamed of, but it pays some bills." He studied Marcus's face for a moment. "You look like someone just shot your dog. What brings you back to this ghost town?" Marcus sank onto the bench, the worn wood creaking beneath him. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the park, the statue of a World War II soldier standing eternal watch over their conversation. "Tried getting a loan to buy Coleman's old shop," he said finally. "Fourth bank that's turned me down. They look at my service record like it's a liability instead of an asset. 20 years of mechanical experience between the Marines and before, and all they see is a number on a credit report." David nodded slowly, understanding darkening his features. "Know that dance all too well, brother. Tried starting my own mobile repair service last year. Banks wouldn't touch me with a 10-foot pole. Said I was high risk because of the PTSD diagnosis in my medical records." A group of teenagers walked past, their laughter and chatter a stark contrast to the heavy conversation. Marcus watched them disappear around the corner, remembering when he used to walk these same streets with the same carefree attitude. "Sometimes I wonder if we're more lost now than we ever were over there," he admitted quietly. At least in combat. We knew who the enemy was. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Marcus of the desert sunsets in Iraq. He stood, his bad leg protesting the movement. I should get going. Staying at the Western Inn until I figure out my next move. David caught his arm. Listen, there's a group of us that meet at the VFW on Thursday nights. Nothing formal, just guys who understand. You should come. He scribbled a number on an old receipt. And call me if you need anything. We take care of our own, remember? Marcus pocketed the number, nodding his thanks. As he walked away from the park, the weight of the rejection letter seemed a little lighter. He might have lost this battle, but somewhere in the back of his mind, a new plan was beginning to form. What he didn't know, couldn't know, was that across town, in a corner office of Cedar Grove National Bank, someone was about to take an interest in his story that would change everything. Marcus sat in his dimly lit motel room, papers spread. Across the worn bedspread like a battle plan. His business proposal, meticulously crafted over sleepless nights, stared back at him, full of dreams but marked with too many red stamps of rejection. The Western Inn's neon sign flickered outside his window, casting an intermittent red glow across the stack of denial letters that had become his unwanted collection. The room's small desk had become his command center, laptop open to a spreadsheet that told a story of dwindling savings, 3 months of living expenses left, maybe 4 if he stretched it. The military pension helped, but in a town like Cedar Grove, where even the McDonald's had shut down, it wasn't enough to build a future on. His phone buzzed. Another text from Rachel. Pittsburgh's still an option, big brother. Jason's firm is always looking for skilled mechanics. Marcus ignored it, just like he'd ignored the last 5. His sister meant well, but she didn't understand. The thought of working in some corporate garage, surrounded by fluorescent lights and performance metrics, made his skin crawl. He needed something of his own, something he could build with his hands and heart. A knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. David Martinez stood outside, holding a 6-pack of beer and a folder thick with papers. Thought you could use some company, he said, stepping inside, and maybe some intel. Marcus cleared space on the bed, sweeping his papers into a messy pile. David cracked open 2 beers, handing one to Marcus before settling into the room's only chair. Been asking around about your situation, David said, taking a sip. You're not the first vet they've turned down. Remember Charlie Wilson from Alpha Company? Tried opening a food truck last year. Same story. Perfect business plan. Experience in food service before and during his service. Stellar references. Banks wouldn't touch him. What happened to him? Marcus asked, though he could guess the answer. Moved to Ohio, working as a line cook at some chain restaurant. David shook his head. Talent wasted because nobody would take a chance on him. Marcus stood, pacing the small room. His leg was acting up again, the old injury a constant reminder of everything he'd given and everything that had been taken. There has to be another way. Private investors, maybe. David opened his folder, spreading out documents across the bed. Already looked into it. Most want collateral we don't have, or they want controlling interest. One guy offered to back you, but he wanted 80% ownership and the right to sell within 3 years. The reality of their situation hung heavy in the air. Marcus stopped at the window, watching as a lone car cruised down the empty street. Cedar Grove after dark was like a town holding its breath, waiting for something, anything, to bring it back to life. You know what kills me? Marcus said, turning back to David. Coleman's shop isn't just sitting there empty. It's like watching a lifeline slip away. That place could be something again. Could help people like us get back on our feet. David nodded, pulling out another document. Speaking of Coleman's, I did some digging. Property taxes haven't been paid in 2 years. City's probably going to seize it soon if someone doesn't step in. Current asking price is less than half what? It was worth 10 years ago. Marcus picked up the property listing, studying the numbers he'd memorized weeks ago. Doesn't matter how cheap it is if no one will give us a loan. Maybe we're thinking too small, David suggested, leaning forward. What if instead of just an auto shop, we pitched something bigger? A training program for vets, teaching them the trade. Could qualify for some government grants that way. The idea sparked something in Marcus's mind, but before he could respond, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, local area code. Marcus Reynolds, he answered, military habit making his voice clip and professional. Mr. Reynolds, this is Patricia from Cedar Grove National Bank. Ms. Henderson, our CEO, would like to meet with you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Are you available? Marcus caught David's questioning look. Yes, I'm available, he replied, trying to keep the surprise out of his voice. After hanging up, David raised an eyebrow. The CEO wants to meet. That's unexpected. Probably just wants to explain in person why I'm such a bad investment, Marcus said, but a small flame of hope flickered in his chest. He'd learned long ago not to trust hope. It had a way of turning to ash in your mouth, but something about this felt different. David gathered his papers, sensing Marcus needed time to prepare. At the door, he paused. Whatever happens tomorrow, you're not in this alone. Remember what Sergeant Miller used to say? Marcus smiled slightly at the memory. The only easy day was yesterday. No, the other thing, David grinned. When one door closes, breach and clear. They finished together, sharing a laugh that felt like old times. After David left, Marcus stayed up late into the night, reviewing his proposal one more time. The numbers hadn't changed, but somehow they felt different. Now, outside, Cedar Grove slept, unaware that tomorrow might just be the day things started to change. For better or worse, Marcus Reynolds was about to face another kind of battlefield, one where the weapons were spreadsheets and profit margins, and the stakes were just as high as any he'd faced in combat. Catherine Henderson's corner office at Cedar Grove National Bank commanded a view of Main Street that told the story of the town's decline better than any financial report. At 42, she was the youngest CEO in the bank's history and often the only woman in the boardroom. Today, she stood at her window watching as Marcus Reynolds climbed the worn granite steps of the bank's entrance, his military bearing evident. Even from 4 stories up, Ms. Henderson, her assistant Ben Parker, appeared in the doorway. Mr. Reynolds is here, and there's something you should know. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I served with him in Iraq, 2nd tour. He saved my life during an ambush outside Fallujah. Never thought I'd see him again, especially not here. Catherine turned from the window, studying Ben's face. In 3 years as her assistant, he'd never mentioned his military service. Tell me more. He was our unit's mechanic. Could fix anything with an engine. Tanks, Humvees, generators. But it was more than that. He had this way of keeping morale up when things got rough, started a makeshift auto shop on base, taught guys basic maintenance, gave us something normal to focus on between missions. A knock interrupted them. Marcus Reynolds stood in the doorway, his posture straight, but his eyes carrying a wariness that Catherine had seen too often in veterans returning home. His charcoal suit was well worn but carefully pressed, dog tags visible beneath his white dress shirt. Mr. Reynolds, please come in. Catherine gestured to the chair across from her desk. Ben, would you bring us some coffee? As Ben left, she caught the flash of recognition between the two men, the slight nod they exchanged. Ms. Henderson, Marcus began, his voice steady, I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me, but I'm not sure why I'm here. Your loan officers have been quite clear about their decision. Catherine sat down, noting how Marcus perched on the edge of his chair, ready to move at a moment's notice. I've been reviewing your application, Mr. Reynolds. Your business plan for Coleman's auto shop is solid. Your experience is impressive. But there's something missing from these papers. Context. Ben returned with coffee, setting it down quietly. Before leaving, Marcus wrapped his hands around the mug but didn't drink. "Context, ma'am?" "Please call me Catherine." She opened a folder on her desk. "Your credit score was impacted by medical bills from your injury. The gap in your employment history coincides with your recovery time. Standard loan algorithms don't account for these circumstances." Marcus's jaw tightened. "With all due respect, Miss Henderson, I don't want special treatment because I'm a veteran. I want a fair shot based on my capabilities. Fair shots are rare these days, Mr. Reynolds, but that's not why I called you here." Catherine stood, walking to a wall of photographs. "This bank was founded in 1923 by my grandfather. He believed banking wasn't just about numbers. It was about building communities. After World War II, he gave loans to returning veterans when other banks wouldn't, called it his investment in America's future." She turned back to Marcus. "Ben tells me you ran a maintenance training program while deployed. Tell me about that." Something shifted in Marcus's expression, a spark of passion breaking through his professional facade. "It started as basic vehicle maintenance classes. Guys needed something productive to do during downtime. But it became more than that. Learning a trade, working with their hands, it gave them purpose, control. Some of them went on to become mechanics after their service." "And is that what you envision for Coleman's? Just an auto shop?" Marcus hesitated, then reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a worn notebook, its pages filled with sketches and notes. "I've been thinking, Cedar Grove has a lot of veterans and not many opportunities. What if the shop could be more? A training center maybe, give guys a chance to learn a trade, rebuild their lives. But the banks see risk," Catherine finished. "I see potential." She walked back to her desk, pressing the intercom. "Ben, could you join us?" When Ben entered, Catherine noticed how his usual professional demeanor softened slightly. "Ben, you never told me about Fallujah." Color rose in Ben's cheeks. "It wasn't relevant to my job performance, ma'am." "It's relevant now." She turned to Marcus. "Mr. Reynolds, I have a proposition for you. Not charity, not special treatment, but a partnership. This town needs what you're proposing more than you realize. Ben, how many veterans do we have in Cedar Grove and the surrounding areas?" "Last count was over 300 within a 30-mile radius," Ben replied. "Many struggling to find work." Catherine pulled out a fresh folder. "Here's what I'm thinking. A modified loan structure tied to a comprehensive business plan that includes the training program. The bank provides initial funding and business development support. You provide the expertise and management. We'll call it Project Gear Shift." Marcus sat straighter, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Why? Why take this risk on me?" Catherine smiled, a mix of determination and something deeper crossing her face. "Because 17 years ago, my brother came home from Afghanistan with similar dreams. He never got his chance. The least I can do is make sure others do." The office fell silent, the weight of untold stories hanging in the air. Outside, Main Street continued its slow decay, but inside this room, something was shifting. Plans were forming. Hope was taking root in the cracks of broken dreams. Marcus looked down at his notebook, then back at Catherine. "When do we start?" Marcus stood in the center of Coleman's auto shop, dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight that penetrated the grimy windows. Catherine Henderson walked beside him, her heels clicking against the concrete floor as they surveyed the space. The musty air carried the lingering scent of oil and rubber, bringing back memories of simpler times. "Old Coleman used to say every engine has a story to tell," Marcus said, running his hand along a workbench thick with dust. "Just gotta know how to listen." He paused at a faded photograph still hanging on the wall. Old man Coleman, surrounded by local high school kids, teaching them the basics of car maintenance. "Tell me your vision," Catherine prompted, watching as Marcus moved through the space. With the careful precision of someone mapping out a mission. Make me see what you see. Marcus walked to the center of the main bay area, gesturing as he spoke. We'll keep the basic layout. 4 main lifts here for general repairs, but we'll add a dedicated training area over there with diagnostic equipment and demonstration engines, classroom space in the old office area. His voice grew stronger as he continued. Veterans can work as apprentices while they learn, earning while they train. We pair experienced mechanics with newcomers, create a support system that goes beyond just fixing cars. Ben, who had joined them for the walkthrough, pulled out a tablet. I've been researching similar programs across the country. Most focus solely on job training, but what you're proposing, combining practical skills with peer support, that's unique. Catherine nodded, making notes in her leather-bound portfolio. What about certifications, professional development? Already? Map that out, Marcus replied, pulling out his worn notebook. He flipped to a page covered in detailed timelines. 24-week program, structured in modules, basic maintenance and repair first, then specializations. ASE certification prep built into the curriculum. By the end, they'll have both skills and credentials. The sound of the door opening echoed through the space. David Martinez stepped in, followed by 3 other veterans Marcus recognized from the VFW meetings. Hope we're not interrupting, David said, but word's getting around about what you're planning. These guys wanted to see for themselves. One of the men, a former army mechanic named Roy Wilson, walked over to an old engine block sitting in the corner. Been doing oil changes at the Quick Lube for minimum wage, he said quietly. Keep applying for better jobs, but without current certifications? He let the sentence hang. Catherine watched the interaction closely, seeing how naturally Marcus shifted into a leadership role. Tell me about your experience, Mr. Wilson, she said, stepping forward. As Roy shared his story, 8 years as a military mechanic, struggling to translate those skills to civilian certifications, Marcus's vision began expanding in real time. We could start with a core group, he said, excitement building in his voice. People like Roy, with existing skills. They become our first instructors once they get their certifications updated. Create a sustainable model. Ben was typing rapidly on his tablet. There's grant money available for veteran employment initiatives. If we structure this right, we could qualify for federal and state funding to supplement the bank's investment. Catherine moved to the front of the shop, studying the large windows. This location is perfect. Visible from Main Street, plenty of parking, close to the VA clinic. She turned back to the group. But this isn't just about fixing cars, is it, Mr. Reynolds? Marcus shook his head, looking around at the veterans who had gathered. No, ma'am. It's about fixing something bigger. When you're in the service, you have a purpose, a mission, coming home. Sometimes that's the hardest battle. This place could be more than a shop or a school. It could be a foundation for rebuilding lives. David stepped forward, pulling out some papers from his jacket. Been working on something since our talk at the motel, he said, handing them to Marcus. Ideas for additional services, resume workshops, financial literacy classes, peer support, groups. Make it a real community center. Catherine watched as the veterans clustered around the papers, offering suggestions and building on each other's ideas. The energy in the room had shifted, the old shop seeming to come alive with possibility. Mr. Reynolds, she said, drawing his attention. I've seen a lot of business proposals in my career. Most focus on profits and market analysis. Important factors, certainly. But what I'm seeing here is something different. You're not just proposing to open a business. You're proposing to fill a void in this community. She walked to the center of the shop, addressing the group. The bank's board meets next week. I'll need a comprehensive proposal, financials, timelines, staffing plans, everything. But I want you all to understand something. She paused, making eye contact with each person. This isn't just about a loan. This is about partnership. About believing that when we invest in people, in community, the returns go far beyond money. Marcus felt a familiar sensation in his chest, the same feeling he'd had before important missions. A mix of anticipation, determination, and the weight of responsibility. But this time, it was different. This wasn't about survival or combat. This was about creation, about building something that could make a real difference. As the afternoon light began to fade, the group dispersed, each person charged with specific tasks for the proposal. Catherine lingered, watching as Marcus made one final walk through the space. "Your brother," Marcus said quietly. "What was his dream?" Catherine smiled sadly. Something not too different from this. He believed in second chances, in the power of community to heal. She straightened her jacket. "Don't make me regret taking this chance, Mr. Reynolds." "No, ma'am," he replied, the old military response carrying a new weight of promise. "We won't let you down." The early morning sun cast long shadows across Coleman's auto shop as Marcus supervised the delivery of the first batch of equipment. The grinding sound of the loading dock's metal shutters opening for the first time in years echoed through the space, a mechanical announcement of rebirth. "Careful with that diagnostic system," Marcus called out as two veterans from his former unit maneuvered a state-of-the-art scanner through the bay doors. "That thing costs more than my first house." The men laughed, but their movements became noticeably more cautious. David Martinez stood at a folding table that had become their temporary command center, checking items off a detailed inventory list. "Hydraulic lifts are scheduled for installation next Tuesday," he reported. "Training engines arrive Thursday. We're actually ahead of schedule." The shop was transforming rapidly, gone were the decades of dust and neglect, replaced by fresh paint and new lighting. The classroom area was taking shape in what used to be the office space, complete with smartboards and training stations. But more impressive than the physical changes was the energy of the people making it happen. Roy Wilson, now officially their lead certification instructor, was directing a team in setting up the diagnostic bay. His quick lube uniform had been replaced by a crisp shirt bearing the new logo, Gearshift Veterans Training Center. The design, a combination of mechanical gears morphing into stepping stones, had been created by a local veteran artist. "Marcus!" Catherine Henderson's voice cut through the controlled chaos. She stood in the doorway, accompanied by two men in expensive suits. "I'd like you to meet James Morton and Philip Chen from the State Veterans Affairs Office." Marcus wiped his hands on a shop rag and crossed the floor, very aware of his work-stained jeans and steel-toed boots. But the officials didn't seem to notice, their attention captured by the activity around them. "Impressive operation you're putting together here," Morton commented, watching as a group of veterans efficiently assembled training stations. "How many are you planning to accommodate in your first class?" 15 in the initial cohort, Marcus replied, falling into the presentation mode they'd practiced. 8-week foundational course followed by 16 weeks of specialized training. We're focusing on quality over quantity to start. Chen nodded approvingly. "And employment placement? We've already secured partnerships with 12 local garages and 3 dealerships," Catherine interjected smoothly. "Plus, our top performers will have the opportunity to join our staff as trainers for future cohorts." As they continued the tour, Ben Parker slipped in through the side door, carrying a stack of papers. He caught Marcus's eye and gave a subtle thumbs up. The latest round of grant applications had been submitted successfully. The officials seemed particularly interested in the community support aspect. The break room had been transformed into a multi-purpose space, with one wall dedicated to resource information, job listings, VA benefits, housing assistance, and mental health services. "This isn't just about automotive training," Marcus explained, his passion evident in his voice. "It's about creating a support network, Many of our veterans struggle not because they lack skills, but because they lack connection. The classroom next door isn't just for teaching engine repair, it's for financial literacy workshops, resume writing sessions, peer support meetings. A commotion at the front of the shop drew their attention. A tow truck had arrived with their first patient, a donated car that would be used for hands-on training. Marcus watched as his team smoothly coordinated its placement, their military training evident in their efficient movements. "Your team works well together," Morton observed. Marcus smiled. "They're not just a team, sir. They're family. Every person here has a stake in making this succeed." As the officials continued their tour with Catherine, David pulled Marcus aside. "Channel 7. News wants to do a feature story on us. Opening day is getting a lot of attention." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit from his military days. The project was growing faster than he'd anticipated. What had started as a dream of a simple auto shop had evolved into something far more significant. The afternoon brought another surprise. A group of high school students arrived, led by their shop teacher. "Heard you might need some help with the cleanup," the teacher said. "These kids are pretty handy with a wrench." Marcus recognized the look in their eyes, the same one he'd had at their age, standing in this very shop, learning from Old Man Coleman. As the day wound down, Marcus found a quiet moment to stand in what would soon be his office. The walls were lined with training certificates waiting to be earned, and a single framed photo, the old picture of Coleman teaching local kids, now cleaned and restored. Catherine joined him, having finished with the officials. "They're impressed," she said. "The state's considering using GearShift as a model for similar programs across the region." Marcus nodded, still looking at Coleman's photo. "Sometimes I wonder what he'd think of all this." "I think he'd be proud," Catherine replied. "You're carrying on his legacy of teaching, just on a bigger scale." The sound of laughter drifted in from the shop floor. The high school students were learning basic tool handling from Roy, their enthusiasm infectious. Marcus smiled, remembering his own first lessons in this building. "We're not just fixing cars," he said quietly. "We're fixing futures." Catherine checked her phone, her expression brightening. "Board just approved the additional funding for the scholarship program. 10 full-ride spots for our second cohort." She paused, studying his reaction. "This is really happening, Marcus." Outside, the sun was setting on Cedar Grove, but inside GearShift a new day was dawning. The dreams sketched out in that first meeting were taking solid form, built on foundation of hope, hard work, and the unshakable bonds of shared service. Marcus stared at the email on his computer screen, his jaw clenched tight enough to hurt. The message from their largest corporate partner was clear and devastating. They were pulling out of their commitment to hire GearShift graduates, citing economic uncertainties and liability concerns. "They can't do this," David said, reading. Over Marcus's shoulder, "We have 15 veterans counting on those positions, the first-class graduates, in 3 weeks." The morning sun streamed through the newly installed windows of GearShift's office, illuminating the progress they'd made over the past months. The training center was fully operational, humming with activity as veterans worked on engines and studied for certifications. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to show. "It gets worse," Marcus said, pulling up another email. "Insurance companies raising our rates. They're claiming our high-risk demographic requires additional coverage." The bitterness in his voice was palpable. Same guys who fought for their freedom are now considered too risky to employ. A knock at the door interrupted them. Roy Wilson stood there, his expression grim. "We need to talk, boss. Jason's having another episode." Marcus followed Roy to the training bay, where Jason Matthews, one of their most promising students, sat, rigid in a corner, his hands shaking as he stared at nothing. The sound of a dropped wrench had triggered a flashback, bringing him back to the IED explosion that had ended his army career. "Everyone clear the bay," Marcus ordered quietly, approaching Jason with the careful movements they'd all learned to use in these situations. The other students filed out, concern evident on their faces. This wasn't the first episode they'd dealt with, but it was the most public. "I can't do this," Jason muttered, as Marcus crouched beside him. "Can't focus. Can't learn, can't—" His words trailed off into ragged breathing. "Yes, you can," Marcus said firmly. "Remember what we talked about. You're not in Baghdad anymore. You're in Cedar Grove. You're safe." Slowly, painfully, Jason began to come back to the present. Later, that afternoon, Catherine arrived for their weekly progress meeting. She found Marcus in the classroom, staring at the wall of certificates, several now bearing proud names of their students. "Rough day?" she asked, noting the tension in his shoulders. "Auto-Pro pulled out," Marcus said without turning around. "Insurance is going up. Had another PTSD incident on the floor." He finally faced her. "Maybe they're right. Maybe this was too ambitious." Catherine set her briefcase down. "Tell me about Jason." Marcus blinked, surprised by the question. "What?" "Jason Matthews, the veteran who had the episode today. Tell me about him." He's one of our best students. Picks up mechanical concepts. Faster than anyone I've seen. Great with customers when he's working the front desk. Has a wife and 2 kids he's trying to support. And before today," Marcus ran a hand through his hair, 3 months clean, was living in his car before he joined our program. Now he's got an apartment, his kids are back in school, and his wife's talking about renewing their vows. Catherine nodded. "Sounds like a failure to me," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Clearly this program isn't working." "That's not fair," Marcus protested. "Jason's made incredible progress. One setback doesn't erase—" "Exactly." Catherine, cut him off. "One setback doesn't erase all the good we're doing. Yes, we've hit some obstacles. Yes, there are challenges we didn't anticipate. But look around you." They walked to the window overlooking the main shop floor. Students had returned to their tasks, working in pairs, teaching and supporting each other. The sound of engines and tools mixed with conversation and occasional laughter. "You've created something special here, Marcus. These men and women aren't just learning a trade. They're rebuilding their lives, finding purpose, creating community. But without auto-pros, positions, then we'll find other partners," Catherine insisted. "Or we'll create our own opportunities. The mobile repair service David proposed, let's fast-track it. The weekend car care clinics for the community, expand them. When one door closes—" "Breach and clear," Marcus finished, a small smile tugging at his lips. But the moment of encouragement was interrupted by Ben rushing into the room, his face pale. "Marcus, Catherine, you need to see this." He handed them his tablet, open to a local news website. The headline made Marcus's blood run cold. "Veteran Training Program Under Scrutiny. Former Students Criminal Past Raises Security Concerns." The article detailed the criminal record of one of their students, a series of minor offenses from before his military service, but presented in the most damaging light possible. The reporter had interviewed nearby business owners who expressed concerns about having troubled veterans in the area. "This is why Auto-Pro pulled out," Marcus realized, his voice hollow. "They got wind of this story." Catherine was already on her phone. "Get me our PR team," she barked into the device, "and set up an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning." "The board," Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Catherine, if they pull the funding, then we'll fight," she said firmly. "This isn't just about gear shift anymore, Marcus. This is about every veteran who needs a second chance, every person who's trying to rebuild their life. We're not giving up." But as they watched more students arrive for the afternoon session, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around them, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that their hardest battle was just beginning. The weight of responsibility for his students, his staff, his dream, pressed down on him like a physical force. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, a coming storm that seemed to echo the challenges they faced. Inside Gearshift, the work continued, but now there was an undercurrent of uncertainty that even the sound of engines couldn't drown out. The emergency board meeting felt like a tribunal. Marcus sat at the end of the long mahogany table in Cedar Grove National Bank's conference room, Catherine beside him, facing a row of stern faces. The morning news had been worse. 2 more partners had pulled their job commitments, and social media was ablaze with heated debates about the program. "The numbers don't lie," Harold Whitman, the bank's senior board member, declared, tapping a stack of reports. Rising insurance costs, partner withdrawals, negative publicity, the risk factors have exceeded our initial projections. The prudent course of action would be to dissolve the program before further damage is done. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the same sensation he'd experienced in combat when everything was going wrong. But this time, he wasn't fighting for survival. He was fighting for survival of a different kind. "If I may," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "You've seen the numbers, but numbers don't tell the whole story. Before we make any decisions, I'd like you to meet someone." At his nod, Ben opened the conference room door. Jason Matthews walked in, dressed in a crisp Gearshift uniform, his back straight and his head high despite the nervousness in his eyes. "This is Jason Matthews," Marcus introduced. 2 months ago, he had a PTSD episode in our shop. Yesterday, he completed his ASE certification with the highest score in the class. Jason cleared his throat. 4 months ago, I was living in my car, convinced I had nothing left to offer my family or society. Today, I have a home, a future, and most importantly, I have hope. His voice grew stronger as he continued. "What happened in the shop? That wasn't a failure of the program. It was proof that it works. Because instead of losing my job, instead of being thrown away again, I found support, understanding, a chance to keep going." The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats as Jason spoke about his journey, about the community he'd found. At Gearshift, about the other veterans whose lives were being transformed. Catherine seized the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're not just running a training program. We're proving that investment in people yields returns that go beyond financial statements. Yes, we've hit obstacles. Yes, there are risks, but consider the cost of doing nothing." She stood, moving to the front of the room. "While you've been looking at liability concerns, we've had 3 graduates start their own mobile repair businesses. While you're worried about negative publicity, we've had local schools asking to partner with us for vocational training. The Chamber of Commerce is interested in using our model for other industries." Marcus watched as Catherine commanded the room, her passion matching his own. "The question isn't whether we can afford to continue this program," she declared. "It's whether we can afford not to." Suddenly, the conference room door burst open. David Martinez rushed in, ignoring the startled expressions of the board members. "Marcus, you need to see this." He handed over his phone, open to a social media post that was rapidly going viral. A local mother had shared the story of how Gearshift's veterans had fixed her car for free when she couldn't afford repairs, ensuring she could keep driving her sick child to chemotherapy appointments. The post had thousands of shares, with comments pouring in from others, sharing similar stories of how the program had impacted their lives. "This is what we're really building," Marcus said, passing the phone around the table. "Not just mechanics. We're building hope, second chances, community." Harold Whitman studied the phone for a long moment before speaking. "The publicity concerns can be addressed," Catherine interjected. "We'll bring in PR specialists, develop a comprehensive communication strategy, but we need to be proactive, not reactive." Show the community the real story of what we're doing. And the insurance issues? We've already received offers from 3 veteran-owned insurance companies willing to work with us, Marcus replied. They understand our mission because they've lived it. The board members huddled together, speaking in low voices. The minutes stretched like hours, until finally Harold turned back to face them. We're prepared to continue our support, he announced, with conditions. We want monthly progress reports, not just financial but social impact metrics. We want to see a concrete plan for sustainability, and we want to explore ways to expand the program's reach. The tension in the room dissolved into relief. As the board members filed out, Catherine caught Marcus's arm. "This isn't over," she warned. "We've bought time, but we need to make changes, strengthen our foundation." Marcus nodded, already formulating plans. "We adapt, evolve, just like we did in the service." He turned to Jason, who had remained quietly in the corner. "Ready to be part of that evolution?" Jason straightened. "Whatever you need, sir." That evening, Marcus stood in the empty shop, listening to the familiar, settling sounds of the building. The challenges weren't over. They might never be over. But something had shifted today. They'd faced a direct threat to everything they'd built and emerged stronger. His phone buzzed with a message from David. "News crew wants to do a follow-up story. Focus on the community impact. Ready to show them what we're really about?" Marcus smiled, typing back a simple response, brief and clear. The next morning, as the sun rose over Cedar Grove, the gearshift sign glowed like a beacon in the early light. Inside, veterans gathered for the day's training, their voices mixing with the sounds of tools and engines. They were more than students. Now, they were a family, a community, a force for change, and they were just getting started. The local news crew's van pulled up to gearshift just as the morning sun was breaking through the clouds. What they found wasn't just a story of survival, but of transformation. The shop floor buzzed with activity, but it was different now, more purposeful, more confident. "And this is our new community outreach center," Marcus explained to the reporter, leading her through what used to be their storage area. The space had been converted into a warm, welcoming room with comfortable seating, resource materials, and a wall of success stories. Photos of graduates with their families, news clippings, thank you letters from the community. "Tell me about this one," the reporter said, pointing to a photograph of an elderly woman hugging a group of veterans. Marcus smiled. "Mrs. Thompson. Her husband was a Korean War veteran who passed away last year. She was about to lose their house because she couldn't afford to maintain it. Our graduates started a weekend program, free home repairs for veterans' families. They've helped dozens of people like her." The camera panned across the wall, capturing the growing tapestry of impact they were creating. But it wasn't just the physical changes that caught the reporter's attention. It was the way the veterans moved through the space. Heads held high, purpose in their steps. Roy Wilson was leading a certification prep class, his voice carrying clearly as he explained complex diagnostic procedures. In the corner, Jason Matthews worked with a new student, showing the same patience and understanding that had helped him through his own struggles. "The recent controversy actually helped us," Catherine explained, joining the interview. "It made us examine our foundations, strengthen our support systems. We've implemented new programs, expanded our services. The community response has been overwhelming." As if on cue, a line of cars pulled into the parking lot. The Saturday morning car care clinic was about to begin. Local residents, many elderly or single parents, brought their vehicles for basic maintenance and safety checks. The veterans worked in teams, teaching while they served. "This is about more than just fixing cars," David Martinez told the camera. "It's about fixing the disconnect between veterans and their communities. Every car we repair, every skill we teach, builds another bridge." The reporter paused at a bulletin board covered with job offers. "I thought you lost several major partners." "Recently? We did," Marcus acknowledged. "But something interesting happened. Local businesses stepped up. Small garage owners, many of them veterans themselves, started calling. They saw what we were really doing here and wanted to be part of it." Catherine's phone buzzed. Another message from the State Veterans Affairs Office. 3 more cities were requesting information about starting similar programs. The ripple effect was beginning. "Watch this," Marcus said, leading the crew to the training area. A group of high school students had arrived for their weekly mentoring session. Veterans who months ago could barely focus on their own training were now confidently teaching the next generation. "My dad's a veteran," one student told the reporter. "He never talked about his service, kept to himself. Then he started coming to the car care clinics. Now he's enrolled in the evening certification program. I haven't seen him this excited in years." The camera captured more than just interviews and activities. It caught the small moments, a veteran comforting another having a tough day, students celebrating a successful certification test, community members bringing homemade meals to share during lunch breaks. "Remember that mobile repair service we talked about?" David pulled Marcus aside during a break in filming. "Just got approved for 3 new vans. We can expand to the rural areas now, reach veterans who can't come to us." The news crew stayed longer than planned, drawn into the story that was unfolding. They filmed the afternoon graduation ceremony. 5 more veterans receiving their certifications, their families cheering, the pride evident on every face. "6 months ago, I couldn't leave my house," one graduate told the camera. "Now I'm starting my own business. Gear Shift didn't just teach me about cars, they taught me how to live again." As the sun began to set, Catherine found Marcus in his office, watching the last students leave for the day. "State funding came through," she said. "We can start the expansion next month." Marcus nodded, but his attention was on a group of veterans in the parking lot. They weren't leaving. They were gathering supplies for another weekend project, another chance to serve their community. "You know what Old Man Coleman used to say?" Marcus asked, picking up the photo of his old mentor. "He said every engine tells a story, but it's not just about what's broken, it's about how you fix it, how you make it better than it was before." The news van pulled away as darkness fell, but Gearshift's lights stayed on. Inside, a small group gathered for an evening support meeting. Outside, the sign glowed like a lighthouse, guiding the way home for those still searching for their path. Cedar Grove was changing. The empty storefronts were filling again. The community was coming alive with a new sense of purpose, and at the heart of it all, in a building that had once seemed destined for demolition, hope was being rebuilt, one life at a time. "We're not just fixing what's broken," Marcus said quietly, watching the veterans head out into the night. "We're building something that was never there before." Catherine smiled, understanding in her eyes. That's the real story they should be telling. And across town, as the evening news began to air, that story was already beginning to spread, touching hearts and changing minds, one viewer at a time. The sunrise painted Cedar Grove in shades of gold, but Marcus barely noticed as he sat in his office, staring at the photo on his desk. It showed him in his Marine uniform, young and confident, standing next to his unit in Afghanistan. His fingers traced the faces of those who hadn't made it back, a morning ritual that grounded him in his purpose. "You would have loved this place," he whispered to the photograph. The sound of approaching footsteps pulled him from his memories. Jason Matthews stood in the doorway, his expression troubled. "Got a minute, boss?" Jason asked, fidgeting with his certification badge. "There's someone you need to meet." In the reception area, a young Marine stood awkwardly in his dress uniform, cover held tightly in his hands, dark circles under his. "I suggested he hadn't slept in days. This is my cousin Michael," Jason introduced. "Just got back from his 3rd tour. He's having a rough time." Marcus recognized the look in Michael's eyes. He'd seen it in his own reflection years ago, the 1,000-yard stare of someone still fighting battles in their mind. "Welcome home, Marine," Marcus said softly, extending his hand. Michael took it automatically, military training overriding his hesitation. "Why don't we talk in my office?" Over the next hour, Michael's story spilled out in fragments. The nightmares, the failed attempts to find work, the growing distance between him and his family. His voice cracked when he mentioned his young daughter, who now flinched at his sudden movements. "I don't know how to be normal anymore," Michael admitted, staring at his hands. "Everything I trained for, everything I was good at, none of it matters out here." Marcus leaned forward, his voice firm but gentle. "That's where you're wrong. Everything you learned, discipline, dedication, teamwork, it all matters. You just need to learn how to translate it." He led Michael to the shop floor, where the morning class was gathering. Veterans of different ages and branches worked side by side, their shared experiences creating a bond that transcended their differences. "See that guy?" Marcus pointed to Roy, who was demonstrating an engine diagnostic procedure. 3 years ago, he was sleeping in his car. Now he's our lead instructor. The woman next to him? Former Navy corpsman. Thought she couldn't learn anything new. Just got certified as a master mechanic. Michael watched the class, something shifting in his expression. "But I don't know anything about cars. Neither did most of them when they started. What you know is how to learn, how to adapt, how to be part of a team. That's what we build on here." As they talked, Catherine arrived for her morning check-in. She took in the situation with a glance, years of experience helping her read the subtle signs of a veteran in crisis. "Mr. Matthews," she addressed Michael, her tone professional but warm, "how would you feel about being part of our new pilot program?" The program she described combined technical training with a gradual reintegration process. Veterans would start part-time, balancing skill development with counseling and family support services. They'd work at their own pace, surrounded by others who understood their struggles. "I can't afford," Michael began, but Catherine held up a hand. "We recently received a grant specifically for recently returned veterans," she explained. "Full scholarship, plus a living stipend for the first 3 months. The hope that flickered across Michael's face was like watching a light switch on in a dark room. For the first time since he'd entered the building, his shoulders relaxed slightly. Later that afternoon, Marcus found Jason in the break room, watching his cousin join the orientation group. "Thank you," Jason said quietly. "When he called me last night, I was scared. Didn't know where else to bring him." Marcus squeezed his shoulder. "This is exactly where he needs to be, where we all needed to be." The day continued, with its usual rhythm of classes, repairs, and community service. But there was something different in the air, a reminder of why they'd started this journey. As evening approached, Marcus stood in the doorway of the training bay, watching Michael work alongside other veterans on a basic maintenance lesson. The young Marine's movements were still tense, but there was focus in his eyes now, purpose in his hands as he learned to manipulate tools instead of weapons. Catherine joined him, following his gaze. "You're thinking about them, aren't you?" she asked, nodding toward the photograph he kept in his office. "Every day," Marcus admitted, "but today I think they'd be proud. We're not just saving lives here, Catherine, we're giving them back their purpose." Through the windows, the setting sun cast long shadows across the shop floor. But inside Gear Shift, the light of hope burned brighter than ever. For Michael, for every veteran who walked through their doors, this wasn't just a training center. It was a bridge back to life, back to family, back to themselves. "One day at a time," Marcus murmured, watching as Michael managed. His first smile of the day. One life at a time. 3 years after opening its doors, Gear Shift had become a model of success that extended far beyond Cedar Grove. The once empty parking lot now overflowed with cars waiting for repair, students learning their trade, and community members gathering for weekly events. Marcus stood in what they now called the Coleman Room, a state-of-the-art classroom dedicated to their founder's memory. The walls were lined with certifications, each one representing a life transformed. The original photo of Old Man Coleman had been joined by dozens more, showing Gearshift's graduates with their families, their own businesses, their restored futures. "Latest numbers are in," Catherine announced, entering with her tablet. 92% employment rate for our graduates. 8 new veteran-owned businesses started this year alone, and the state wants to expand the program to 3 more cities. But it wasn't just the statistics that told their story. It was Michael, now their youngest instructor, teaching with the same patience and understanding that had helped him heal. It was Roy Wilson, running their mobile repair unit, bringing hope to rural veterans who couldn't make it to the center. It was Jason Matthews, who had just been promoted to program director, proving that one bad day didn't define a life. "Remember when we thought we were just opening an auto shop?" Marcus asked, smiling at the memory. Catherine laughed, remembering. Those early meetings in her office, the sound of engines and tools, provided a constant backdrop to their conversation, but it was different now, more confident, more purposeful. Through the windows, they could see David Martinez leading a group of high school students through their apprenticeship program, building bridges between generations of service members. "We're not just fixing cars anymore," Catherine observed, watching a group of veterans working together on a complex engine repair. "We're fixing futures, one person at a time." Outside, the sun set on Cedar Grove, casting a golden glow over the Gearshift sign. The town had changed too. New businesses had opened, drawn by the energy and community spirit that radiated from the center. What had started as one man's dream had become a catalyst for transformation, proving that sometimes the greatest victories come not from what we gain, but from what we give back. Marcus touched the dog tags he still wore, thinking of all the battles that had led to this moment. "No," he agreed, "we're doing something much bigger. We're showing them the way home." 5 years after Gearshift's founding, Marcus stood before a crowd gathered in Veterans Memorial Park. The occasion was the groundbreaking ceremony for their second location, a larger facility that would include not just automotive training, but programs for construction, HVAC, and other skilled trades. "When I first came back to Cedar Grove," Marcus began, his voice carrying across the hushed audience, "I thought I was at the end of my road. Turned out I was just at the beginning of a new mission." Catherine sat in the front row, pride evident in her eyes. The bank's initial investment had been repaid many times over, not just in financial terms, but in the transformation of an entire community. Next to her sat Harold Whitman, the board member who had once advocated shutting them down. Now he was their strongest supporter, having seen firsthand how investing in people yielded returns that couldn't be measured in dollars alone. "Gearshift was never about just fixing cars," Marcus continued. "It was about believing that everyone deserves a second chance, that the skills that kept us alive in combat could be transformed into skills that help us thrive in peace." The evidence of that transformation was all around them. Graduates of their program had opened businesses throughout the region. The mobile repair units, started by Roy Wilson, now served 5 counties. Jason Matthews had developed a trauma-informed training program that was being studied by veterans organizations across the country. "But our work isn't done," Marcus declared, gesturing to the construction site behind him. "Every day, more veterans come home needing what we needed, a purpose, a community, a way forward. This new facility isn't just about expansion, it's about keeping a promise to leave no one behind." As the ceremony concluded, Marcus watched Michael, now their head of student services, leading tours of the new site. The young Marine who had arrived broken 3 years ago now stood tall, his confidence evident in every movement. Beside him, his daughter skipped happily, no longer fearing her father's presence. The sun set over Cedar Grove, painting the sky in colors that reminded Marcus of those desert sunsets so long ago. But now, instead of war zones and danger, he saw hope and possibility. What had started with a denied loan and a chance meeting had grown into something that was changing lives across the nation. "Ready for the next mission?" Catherine asked, joining him as the crowd dispersed. Marcus smiled, touching the dog tags he still wore. "Always. We've got more lives to change." Behind them, the gearshift sign glowed like a beacon in the gathering dusk, guiding the way home for those still searching for their path. Today, gearshift stands as a testament to the power of second chances and unwavering belief in human potential. With multiple locations across the country, its model has been adopted by cities nationwide, creating a network of hope for veterans seeking their way home. Marcus still starts each day early, walking through the original shop where it all began. The walls now hold hundreds of success stories, photographs, certificates, and letters from families whose lives have been transformed. The old photo of Coleman still hangs in his office, a reminder of where this journey started. Catherine remains on the board, her initial vision having grown far beyond what either of them imagined that first day in her office. The bank's investment in people has created a ripple effect that continues to touch lives across generations. But perhaps the most powerful testament to gearshift's success isn't in the numbers or accolades. It's in the daily miracles that happen on the shop floor. It's in the sound of laughter replacing silence, in the pride of newly earned certificates, in the quiet moments when a veteran realizes they've finally found their way home. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest chances, Marcus often tells new students. All you need is someone willing to believe in you, and then learn to believe in yourself. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of hope, transformation, and the power of second chances. Together, we can make a difference, one story at a time. Remember, every engine tells a story, but it's not just about what's broken. It's about how you fix it, how you make it better than it was before.